The Penn State Nittany Lions hosted their spring game yesterday, April 13th, to conclude spring practice. And Team White dominated Team Blue 27-0. This was a game that was dominated by defense, which when you look deeper into the rosters and lineups and how the game was played, with very little creativity on offense, Andy Kotelnicki obviously hiding some things as he should for the fall, just like Chip Kelly did at Ohio State in their spring game, which was also yesterday on April 13th. The offense had a lot of starters missing. Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen were missing at running back. Starting tight end Tyler Warren was out. And on the offensive line, tackles Drew Shelton and Anthony Dunco and guards Sal Wormley and J.B. Nelson sat out. And defensively, Keziah Ezard and Hakeem Biaman were out. KJ Winston was not in uniform, and Keon Wiley wasn't either. But there were more starters, projected starters, who were out on offense, and also a larger amount of offensive players who sat out compared to the defense. And as you would expect, given that and the fact that Penn State's defense for the past few seasons has been the stronger side of the ball compared to the offense, you had the result that we got yesterday. And because of the amount of projected starters that are sitting out, and the fact that Penn State has what I would say is going to be, or could be, a completely new offensive look. This isn't like Minnesota or Purdue or Ohio State, where they're running the same offense that they did last year, or a similar offense with a different play caller or different adjustments, mostly in the case of Chip Kelly taking over for Ryan Day and managing the offense at Ohio State, but still running a spread system that comes from Chip Kelly's philosophy, as Day was a student of Kelly. Kotelnicki is totally changing gears from what Mike Yurcich wanted to do. So I think in the case of this spring game in particular, there's less to take away. But there are still some takeaways. And one of them is the fact that it's up to James Franklin as to whether this team is going to compete for the college football playoff, compete for a national title, compete for a Big Ten championship, and whether they're not just going to compete for those things, but win them. If you make the playoff, can you win the national championship, reach the semifinals, or win it all? If you reach Indy, can you win in Indy? Can you beat an Ohio State, a Michigan? Can you beat newcomer Oregon, who looks to be an elite program in college football? Because many of these young players were impressive. We mentioned a few seconds ago how many players sat out on offense and some on defense. The defensive tackle room, I thought, did well. This is a defensive tackle unit that mainly is suited for pass rush, not run stop, but they were serviceable, both in stopping the run and getting to the quarterback. Part of that was the offensive line having many different opt-outs for the spring game just to make sure everyone's healthy and also see what the younger players have in them. The offensive line struggled a little bit early, but they held their ground, I think, at the end. And at running back, Quentin Martin Jr. and other younger running backs looked great. At tight end, I thought there was serviceable play there. Caden Saunders was targeted often at wide receiver. Lambert Smith was another player who didn't see action in the spring game. Saunders was targeted rather often. And Pribula looked decent scrambling. And also at quarterback, true freshman, Ethan Grunkemeyer, I think that's how you say his last name. He did well. He showed some quick release, and he didn't look any worse, really, passing the football than Drew Allar and Bo Pribula. Pribula barely passed the football at all. That's why his team was on the losing end. They scored 0 points. Meanwhile, Allar's team scored 27. So there's talent here, and there's depth, I would say, in the trenches on both sides of the football. There's depth at tight end. There's obviously depth at running back. I think Penn State has one of the best running back rooms in the country. There's depth at linebacker, defensive end. Abdul Carter looks like a beast. The secondary, it didn't look like a disaster. It looked much better than what it was in the Peach Bowl. So That's very encouraging. And there's potentially depth at wide receiver. If Lambert Smith stays, I know there have been transfer portal rumors, but if he stays, improves, and Julian Fleming can stay healthy, and Saunders can take the next step, then this receiver room will be better than Penn State's has been in the previous season, and maybe some would say the previous 2 seasons, since we know that Fleming has talent, Lambert Smith has talent, and Caden Saunders was recruited highly out of high school. But where I want to really start and zone in is quarterback, because Allar was, let's be real, and also let's be fair to Allar. Allar was overhyped from the beginning coming into Penn State. He had high expectations placed upon his shoulders. I mean, people were talking about him like he was going to be Josh Allen in the NFL in college. I mean, that was the discussion around him, was that he could come into the Big Ten and just be this elite quarterback. Well, he wasn't, and I got a lot of things wrong last year, but I think last year was one of my best, if not my best year, making predictions. I got Michigan winning the national championship right. I got Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State being the big 3 and no one else really coming close correct. I got the Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan game predictions all correct in both the preseason and the regular season, and I made an accurate prediction that Drew Allar was not going to be a top 2 Big Ten quarterback, that he was not going to be even close to J.J. McCarthy, and he wasn't going to be at the same level as Kyle McCord, and he wasn't. This season, I think with Andy Kotelnicki and another year of maturity, I think there's a chance for him to break out and take a step forward. We did not see that in the spring game, but also the offense was extremely vanilla. Prabula, I think, is the best runner by a mile. Allar, you see that potential. You see the cannon of an arm. You see the accuracy. There was this one vertical route that I think it was Saunders who ran it, and he beat his man on the defensive side. He beat the defensive back that was covering him. He had a step on him, and maybe if he dove to catch the ball, he would have gotten it, but Allar just overthrew it a little bit, and if he didn't, that would have been a touchdown. And in big games, whether it's against Ohio State, particularly a secondary that is as good as Ohio State's, or maybe if Penn State plays Michigan and Indy, since they don't play them in the regular season, or when they play on the road at Wisconsin, or in Week 1 against West Virginia, if you want to make style points and ensure a victory and quickly quiet any hopes of the Mountaineers winning that game in stunning fashion, making those big plays is important. And Kotelnicki's offenses are creative, they can be methodical, they can also be explosive. So we'll just have to see in regards to how efficient the offense is. We'll have to wait and see until the fall, because this offense was very vanilla. But at quarterback, just from a talent and developmental perspective alone, I was not impressed. And I don't think anyone was. I think that there is not just a lot of room for growth for Allar, but I think that there is a lower ceiling than what most would have projected him to have coming out of high school. There are accuracy issues. He is not as mobile, clearly not as mobile as Josh Allen was, and I don't think he will be. So there is that stylistic difference there. And I use Josh Allen because that was the comparison that was made of him coming out of high school. And there are some accuracy issues, but Drew Allar is good at one thing, and that's not turning over the football, which Josh Allen loves to do in the NFL. Outside of quarterback play, wide receiver play, I couldn't really tell how good or not so good it was. There were some drops, which are concerning, but Lambert Smith was out. Fleming played for Prabula's team, so you didn't get to see. You really, that's not a fair shot at him for a fan. Obviously, this is just one of Penn State's many spring practices, but from a fan's perspective, you can't assess how Julian Fleming did or how good he is when you put what is essentially a wildcat quarterback on his team. That's what Bo Pribula is right now, is essentially a wildcat quarterback. I think that Kotelnicki is going to have fun using him because Pribula is elusive enough and he has great acceleration as a scrambler to where I think he could terrorize almost any defense in the country if his offensive line and tight ends and receivers can block for him. And if he has good running backs, which he does. Penn State has some of the best running backs in the country. The running back room, particularly Quinton Martin Jr., I think really shined. There were some holes that were found and that were, I think, utilized. Sometimes running backs as young as Quinton Martin Jr. and also as athletic as him are impatient and they don't make proper cuts or they don't find the right hole. He did. I was impressed with him. I forget the running back who is also a freshman. I forget his name. He wasn't rated as high in the 2024 recruiting class, but he was also impressive. So I think that, look, you can get Quinton Martin Jr. involved, I think, as soon as this year, especially if there are some injury concerns with Katron Allen or Nicholas Singleton, or if they're not doing well and it feels like the offense needs a jolt. But there is depth that's very good. You always want to be deep at a position that you pride yourselves being good at. And Penn State under Franklin has always prided themselves on being able to run the football. The offensive line in the first drive or first few drives looked disgusting. I mean, it looked like an Indiana, Kyle Flood, Chris Ash, Rutgers O-line. It was atrocious, but by the end, it was serviceable, and these were mostly backup players, a fact that I didn't immediately know, but I eventually figured out. And given that, while I think this unit doesn't have elite upside, I think they have plenty of depth. I think that this O-line, with all of their starters coming into the season, if they face a few injuries, I do think that this unit will be resilient enough to play at a similar level between their starters and their second stringers. I think this unit is deep, and Cooper Cousins looked good, true freshman player, and I think that having an incoming transfer like Nolan Rucci, who did well at Wisconsin as a backup, I think this offensive line does have a chance to improve compared to last year's, on I would say probably a run block basis. Pass block, it'll be hard to improve with Olu Fashanu leaving for the NFL, obviously. But I liked what I saw from the offensive line toward the end of the game when they began to get physical, when they began to open up holes, and then Quinton Martin Jr. would, find them and make the proper cuts. It was good. And for receiver, I mentioned drops, but there were also some overthrows or behind the receiver throws. The quarterback play just wasn't good. It wasn't. And if there's something to be concerned about offensively, it's far and away the quarterback play. Because you can have a great scheme, and with a great scheme, you can hide some weaknesses about a team. In big games, it's going to be nearly impossible to hide bad quarterback play. You can hide outside of the offensive line and quarterback play. In big games, you can hide some of the other positions at times. If you have a good QB, or at least an average QB, and a good or great or above offensive line, you can mask plenty of weaknesses in the skill positions. An elite offensive line can make an average running back look great, but a bad quarterback will hold the wide receiver room back. You saw this with Kyle McCord last year with Ohio State. So the offense was not the most impressive side of the ball. That was the defense. But before we talk about that, I would like to give a shout out to my Patreon members for sponsoring this channel. I will shout them out by name at the end. They are up here on the screen. And before we resume, please click that like button. Please subscribe to the channel, and also click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release more college football content, Big Ten football content, and Penn State football content. And comment your reaction to this spring game down below, areas where you have concerns, areas that you want to give praise, etc. Let me know what you think about this spring game and about Penn State football as they close spring practice and head into the summer. Let me know down in the comments section below. And thank you to my Patreon members for sponsoring this video and channel. If you want to support the channel, you can sign up to my Patreon or purchase merchandise on my store via the links in the description or in the pinned comment at the top of the comment section. Now let's get back to it. Penn State's defense, I'm going to be very brief because this unit did so well that they're not as intriguing to talk about. I think that Tom Allen is going to do a good job this upcoming season, and because of the poor passing game, I can't exactly say how good the DBs are. They got burned a few times. I don't think the defensive back room, the secondary, is as good as it was last year. Certainly not as good as it was in 2022. But we'll just have to see. I thought that, with the bad pass attack, that especially with new and young players, and also, again, Kevin Winston Jr. was out. There's so much that's changed in the past few months in this room, and then to have a bad pass attack, so you don't know how the secondary will do against a good quarterback, especially against an explosive one or an explosive set of receivers, because Lambert Smith was out. Fleming, you could see him run routes, but he only caught, I think, one pass for like 5 yards from Pribula. So with the secondary, I don't know. I think they're improving, but given the fact that they did get cooked a few times on routes, they are inconsistent. And I think that they'll improve with time and with coaching, but we'll just have to wait and see. It'll be interesting how they play against Ohio State. And looking at Penn State's schedule, Wisconsin is another team that has a great stable of receivers, and I'd be fascinated to see how Penn State does against those two passing offenses. And of course, as long as Tyler Van Dyke is improved compared to his past 2 seasons at Miami, where he was very inconsistent, just like how I think Penn State's secondary is right now. But outside of the secondary, linebacker looks great. The defensive line looks elite, especially at defensive end, where Abdul Carter just looks like a beast. The defensive the defensive line, they won the battle in the trenches. They got several sacks, several pressures. They made Allar, Pribula, Grunkemeyer uncomfortable. And they had some tackles for loss against the run as well, and they at times bullied the offensive line. Rarely did I see the offensive line bully the defensive line. I think that this defense has a chance to remain an elite unit, and probably bigger than a chance. Probably has a sizable chance to remain an elite unit. And there's a smaller chance, but still a significant one, that if the secondary improves, they could be better than last year's defense. And that might sound insane, but if the secondary, let's say it improves, and it's just as good or nearly as good as last year's defense, and Abdul Carter at defensive end totally works out, which I think he will, and you have a similar upside player to Chop Robinson, and Donnie Dennis-Sutton breaks through, and the defensive tackle room with everyone coming back who mattered last year improves as well. An even better defensive line, a linebacker room that returns Kobe King, and that returns Dominic DeLuca, that returns Tony Roas, and Tyler Elston, and also Keon Wiley. So it's still deep. Curtis Jacobs left, but they returned most of their production at linebacker. If the front 7, front 6, depending on whether they're in a 4-3 or 4-2-5, improves, and the back 4 or back 5 is the same or slightly decreases, that overall, particularly in the Big Ten, where defending the run and shutting down the run matters more than shutting down the pass, is going to translate to an even better defense. And there's a chance that that happens with Penn State. So the defense, while the storylines aren't as interesting, certainly has better play. It's more entertaining and just a better quality watch to pay attention to Penn State's defense than the offense. And pay attention to this unit. People are really talking about Michigan, Ohio State, and Iowa. And even some are talking about Nebraska for competing for who's the best defense in the Big Ten. think some people are perhaps selling too quickly on Penn State's defense from what I see. Finally, I want to talk about like what I have at the end of every one of these videos, whether it has been Minnesota or reacting to Ohio State spring game. What are the team needs with the upcoming portal cycle? What are the goals of this team? And what's my overall assessment of this team in light of the spring game, which isn't going to change too much from prior to the spring game, but there may be some things that I tweak. Penn State's 23rd in returning production right now. They're 7th in preseason SP Plus rankings. They were not impressive on Saturday, but that does not mean they are not a great team. And I think that QB, receiver, and the offensive line need work on offense, and tight end, because Tyler Warren's a great tight end as long as he's healthy. That tight end room will be deep and will be great. And running back, I think, look awesome. And I like Kotelnicki's scheme. And I think that the offensive line, again, they don't have this elite upside, but I think they can be great. Maybe they can be near elite if everything goes right. And with that depth and that running back room, this rushing attack could improve compared to last year's, and it can be even better than 2022's. Maybe it won't have the same explosiveness or not the same yards per carry, perhaps, but that won't matter if the rushing attack can do great work in big games, whether that's against Ohio State or perhaps in the Big Ten championship game or in the college football playoff, which now that it's expanded to 12 teams makes Penn State infinitely more likely to have their first playoff appearance in their history. In fact, part of me looking at teams like the 2017 team or even last year's team, that certainly, if I think, this is just a personal opinion, I think if Penn State game planned better against Ohio State and didn't have Allar throw it 40 times, I do think that they could have won that game. I really do. Now, again, they have James Franklin on the sidelines. Penn State fans who follow this channel know that I'm very skeptical of Franklin, and I think rightfully so. Michigan controlled that game from second quarter onward, and I don't think Penn State was ever beating that Michigan team just based off of matchups. I think Penn State had a better game plan against Michigan, and yet Michigan controlled that game better than Ohio State did when they played Penn State. So Penn State being more fit, I think, to match up against Ohio State pound for pound, schematically, and how they've built up their roster. If the offensive line works out and Allen and Singleton are healthy, why not? I mean, this team does have the capability to win the Big Ten and make a run in the playoff. The question is, will they? It's not, can Penn State win the Big Ten or reach the playoff or win playoff games? It's, will they? And that's at the feet of James Franklin. I mean, Abdul Carter, again, looks like he is a unicorn. He is probably going to be one of the best, if not the best, defensive ends in the country this year. The defensive tackles and other defensive linemen at end look good. This is just a spring game, but I think this is a good peek into some areas for Penn State, like the front, the defensive front, the front seven, front six, the trenches, the younger running backs. And from those positions alone, my review is mostly positive, again, outside of quarterback. And because the scheme was very bland, maybe Allar is already better than he was last year, but that bland scheme is just holding him back. But there were inaccuracies in his passing game and inconsistencies, so he'll have to improve if Penn State wants to make a run to the playoffs, or I think win the Big Ten. This college football season will be a down one compared to last year. It'll be more like the 2021 season in terms of average team strength, but Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, and potentially some other teams. Penn State's in that list, but Penn State will have to face one of those teams to win the Big Ten if they reach Indy, and they'll have to face Ohio State in the regular season. So they have to win a big game to play to their ceiling. They have to. They do not have an ACC schedule. They do not have a Big 12 schedule. They're playing in the Big Ten. It's time to beat Ohio State. It's time to compete for the Big Ten. It's time to reach the playoffs. James Franklin needs a top 10 win, and he needs to improve off of last season. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thank you to Crash2488 for sponsoring this video as a Heisman patron. Thanks to Spencer Bringhurst, Chris Lane, and SFS Inverted, now called Connor Little OH, as All-American patrons. And thanks to Will Loftus, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being all-conference patrons. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.